Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook from March through June 2021. Over the last 30 days, we've seen generally warm temperatures across many areas of the Great Basin. However, precipitation, due to some bigger storms at the end of January, brought above normal precipitation to much of northern and western Nevada and up into Idaho, and even to parts of the higher terrain of northern Utah. This precipitation is very significant because it not only brought snowfall to the higher elevations, but it also brought significant snowfall to the lower elevations of western and parts of northern Nevada, which remained on the ground for several days. Therefore, we likely had quite a bit of compaction of our fine fuels in this area of above normal precipitation in northern Nevada and also up into southwest Idaho. Since the beginning of the water year, October 1st, 2020, precipitation still remains well below normal across much of Nevada and Utah and the Arizona Strip, and even up into parts of southern Idaho. Areas that are near normal are northwest Nevada with that storm again, mainly largely due to what we had in late January, and then also with the more continuous storms that have affected central Idaho and over into eastern Idaho and Wyoming. Currently, our snowpack is now near normal over the northern half of the Great Basin. Some exceptions are parts of Idaho, but also the Sierra into western Nevada, and then also much of Utah still below normal. The areas that are more largely below normal are in the far south. Looking at our soil moisture anomaly at the end of February into early March, showing very dry conditions still across the higher terrain of Utah, despite some of the snowfall we did receive over the last 30 to 45 days. It's still not quite enough to really make an impact on the drought conditions that are currently ongoing across Utah. Similar conditions over in northern and central California. Looking at our more short-term evaporative demand drought index, again, some minor improvements over the northern Utah mountains with the recent snowfall and also over the northern half of the geographic area. But again, still in the far south, still dealing with at least some low to moderate drought conditions. Again, this is more short-term conditions. We are still looking at that longer-term drought in many of these locations. So here's our longer term drought. You can see we are in extreme to exceptional drought over the southern half of the Great Basin. Again, this includes much of the higher terrain of Utah, but we did have some slight improvement in the northern mountains just due to the recent snowfall, and also some improvement in the Sierra and western Nevada with that also that snowfall in late January. Further north up into Idaho, conditions not quite as severe, but certainly some moderate to severe drought ongoing in some of those locations. And looking at our drought outlook on the right, we are not expecting any significant improvements to the drought, especially across Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip. Looking at some of our current ERC charts, up in the north in Idaho, ERCs are below normal, just with a little bit cooler conditions and a little bit more constant chances at precipitation. However, this GB06, which is in south central Idaho, is one of the drier spots in Idaho. Looking further south over into western Nevada, you can see ERCs are near record highs for the time of year. Despite the recent moisture we have seen warmer and drier conditions recently. Similar conditions over into southern Utah as well. So again, ERCs and the fuels really bounce back fairly quickly after even significant precipitation at this point. The 10-hour fuel moisture is still showing fairly good conditions over the northern half to 2/3 of the geographic area with pretty high fuel moisture. Again, very dry conditions still in southern Nevada, the Arizona Strip, and southwest Utah. Similar trend with our 100-hour fuel moisture and our 1,000-hour fuel moisture as well. Things are still sitting very good over the northern half of the GAC, however, southern areas still on the drier side. However, we don't have any large incidents in the Great Basin, and it's fairly quiet across the country. So now that we've seen what we've been experiencing here over the last few months, we'll go into our forecast for what we expect here over the next few months. First, looking at La Nina and El Nino, we have been in a state of La Nina throughout the winter. We are expecting some ocean temperatures to generally warm, probably pushing us back up into neutral going into the fire season, and then possibly dipping down for a secondary La Nina, possibly towards the fall. But again, still quite a bit of uncertainty later in that forecast period, and you can see some of the outlier models have some very high swings, both into El Nino and into a stronger La Nina as well. But most of the models are really indicating more of a neutral trend going into the summer, and then probably some cooling later towards fall. And this does have some impacts to our weather patterns across the Great Basin. So the 8 to 14 day outlook, just taking us into the second 2 weeks of March, shows cooler conditions and wetter conditions across much of the Great Basin, and we will continue to see those colder storms really track across the Great Basin. Again, the second and third week of March, with possibly some changes into a warmer and drier conditions later in the month. So our monthly outlook again shows cooler conditions, but possibly drier conditions for March as a whole, especially over the eastern portion of the Great Basin. Again, many of those storms will either be impacting western and northern areas, or we will have some storms coming in from the south, bringing some moisture to the far southern geographic areas. However, these will be fairly short-lived, and we're not expecting significant precipitation. The 3-month outlook, taking us from April through June, shows warmer and drier conditions across much of the West, really, which is not unusual to see that time of year. We will likely continue to have some storms move across at times, but right now the pattern is looking a little bit warmer and drier as we head into the beginning of fire season. So now that we've seen all of the past conditions and our future projections, we can go into our outlook. So for March and April, we're still looking at normal conditions for the Great Basin, which is generally low fire potential. Probably even this year, even as we see more target shooting and recreators out in some of the backcountries, we're not expecting as many issues with fire starts, or at least spread. Just we are expecting those fine fuels to be a little bit more compacted this year than we've seen the last couple of years. So again, those grass fires are not quite as a significant concern this year going into the spring months. As we go into May and June, still looking at normal conditions really for much of the geographic area. The only area to watch initially will be the far south, especially in the higher elevations. Again, this is due to our ongoing drought and also just our continued drier than normal conditions down there, and the drier than normal conditions we're expecting to continue going into the May and June months. So we could see an early start to fire season in the far south higher elevations, and we also could see the monsoon potentially come in a little bit early this year in June. We'll obviously still be watching that, quite a bit of uncertainty that late in the forecast period, but if we do see some initial pushes of moisture, the main concern will be the initial push of lightning, considering we don't typically get super wet conditions right off the bat with the monsoon, so that will just exacerbate our above normal conditions in the far south heading towards May and June. So again, we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll have you some updates for next month. So that concludes our seasonal for this month. Check back on April 1st for the next outlook.